We basically provide professional education. We support our members, local communities, schools, and practicing professionals through advocating for good planning practice, hosting diverse events, and facilitating professional development opportunities in the New York metro area. So for those of you who are coming for the continuing education credits, you just have to go to the website. For those of you who aren't, just ignore that. But we're very pleased today to be co-chairing this event with the Municipal Art Society on this really very timely topic. And my colleague, Tom Devaney, will be telling you more about it. But before that, I'd like to give some thanks to some of the people that have been incredibly supportive to us in organizing all of this, besides the panelists, and Tom will event them. But I wanted to say thanks to Lara Marita and Hei Kyung Yang from the Department of City Planning, the Queens office. I know all of them have done an incredible amount of work, and I'm sure many of you have benefited from that in the public hearings. I also wanted to thank Laura Singh from Councilmember Wan's office, who has given us very, very good guidance. So thank you. And we're also really thrilled today that Senator Kristen Gonzalez has stopped by. And so we would like to have her say a few words before I introduce Tom and the panel. Please, Senator.
We'll make it. I'll make it the panel. All right, thank you so much. Hi everyone, good evening. How's everyone doing? I wanted to come by today and just thank everyone for showing up in their free time to come to what is a very, very important conversation in this neighborhood. And as the state senator here, but also as someone who was born and raised in Queens, I have seen a lot of development happen, and a lot of that development did not happen in coordination with community. And I'm really excited to see conversations like this happening because I see us changing that in Long Island City. And yes, we can give that. And as the state senator, we actually helped unlock some state funding to support the Long Island City Coalition in last year's state budget. The work that they're doing. We're also, actually long before I was an elected official, I was on the founding board of the Western Queens Community Land Trust and saw Memo doing the work, Memo out. And so this is really a continuation of the values that I've had, I know this community has, around people-centered development. We know we need housing, but we also need investment in infrastructure. We need investment in our arts. We're here in Culture Lab today. Thank you, Culture Lab. And we also need to ensure that we're building for the future, which means waterfront resiliency. My district is waterfront on both sides, from Queens down to Brooklyn and the east side of Manhattan. And what I can tell you is if we do not proactively have these conversations, what we're gonna look at is increased flooding, increased strain on our sewage systems, and we're certainly not gonna see the level of green space that we all deserve. Yeah. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this conversation. I know it's really crazy with what's happening on the federal level in our city government, and I will say I spend every single day resisting, but this proves that even in all of the noise, we're not losing sight of our community and our values. And we have the power to change what our neighborhoods look like, even despite all the craziness happening in other places. So thank you so much. I'm excited for this panel.
Thank you so much, Senator. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Tom Devaney, who is Director of Land Use Planning at the Municipal Art Society. He participates on our committee and really has contributed very much. And so he will be introducing the panel. So again, thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Martha. Everybody hear me?
Yep. Yes.
I'm gonna say that I think we really nailed the amount of seats for this room. We had there was some debate whether we had too many or too few, and I think we really captured the audience. And I wanna thank everybody for coming tonight. on this cold winter night, and just shows the commitment and the interest from the community. Really excited about the talk today, or this evening. We've got great collection of voices. I wanted to introduce, I don't think I put everybody in order in my notes, but that's okay. So I wanted to introduce to my right, Lisa Gorin is the executive director at New York Magazine, a native New Yorker, and a decades-long resident of Long Island City. She's also the head of the Long Island City Coalition and co-vice president of Hunters Point Community Coalition. She's working to promote comprehensive community-based planning and sustainable development. To Lisa's right is Anatol Ashraf, who is a member of the Queens, has been a member of the Queens Community Board 2 since 2019 and has served as chair since 2023. He is a Paris-born native New Yorker. I have to mention, with a 917 area code, he has been a 22-year resident of Queens CB District, first in my lovely village of Woodside and Sunnyside. He's a LaGuardia Community College and Columbia University grad. To his right is Memo Salazar, and Memo is a Mexican-born filmmaker, writer, activist, and excuse my notes here, and a longtime resident of Queens. He is the current co-chair of the Western Queens Community Land Trust, which aims to bring truly affordable housing and community-owned land and ownership to New York City. And on the far right, I want to welcome Emery Gray, who is the executive director of Open New York, the state's leading grassroots pro-housing advocacy organization, where she has driven the organization's growth over the last 2.5 years. She has served for 3 years as a senior advisor in City Hall overseeing land use and housing policy, and previously worked for EDC and the Cambridge Housing Authority in my fair home state of Massachusetts. So welcome all of you, and thanks for coming and participating in this important discussion as community is waiting for the certification of the rezoning. And I know that I don't have to do a tutorial in this room about the rezoning, which actually makes it easy for me, because we can get right into some of the main topics that Long Island City waterfront will be dealing with. I do want to say, since everyone's giving their Queens credibility, I've been living in Woodside for 24 years, and from my western windows, I've watched Long Island City develop over these years. As a professional planner for the Municipal Arts Society in 2018, I led a study. It was a retrospective analysis of the rezonings of downtown Brooklyn and Long Island City, the original Special Long Island City mixed-use district from 2001. And our study was basically looking back at the rezonings, mainly from an environmental review perspective, where we looked back and said, and looked at what was projected for development in Long Island City, and then what actually happened in terms of development. And as many of you know, Long Island City and downtown Brooklyn were envisioned as new central business districts outside of Manhattan, and the rezonings were meant to promote commercial office space, but as we see in the Court Square area, that office space wasn't what manifested, and what happened was it took a while for the development to coalesce, but over the last 10, 15 years, we've seen explosion of high-end residential development in the Court Square area. So you don't have to be a city planner to recognize that with the neighborhood plan, there's an incredible opportunity. And that's what I want to focus our discussion tonight on the many opportunities in this extremely unique and an important part of New York. And it's interesting because if you think about it, I was trying to think of another area of New York where you had bookend rezonings, a generation apart that will transform the neighborhood. So on the issue of opportunities, the first question that I wanted to ask all of you is, as I mentioned, you don't have to be a city planner. When you walk around the rezoning area, the first thing that I think of is development potential and planning potential. So I want to get an idea from all of you. If we were to come back 15 years from now and Memo drags me out of the nursing home that I'm living in and we have this discussion again, what would be the hallmarks for your vision of success for the neighborhood plan? You're the closest, Lisa, so you're number one. Is this on? Test. Oh, that's on.
Okay, before I answer, I just want to thank Senator Gonzalez for being here and for all her support. It's been unbelievably great and allowing us to move forward. So, I mean, if we were to look back 10 years from now, or 15 if we're still alive, I think the regret that we'll have is if we don't deal with the current risks that we have of repeating the problems of the past and the mistakes of the past. And I'm sorry, my voice is all of a sudden cracking. We know what problems resulted from that first rezoning, or from that rezoning in 2001. Mixed use was not really mixed use. It was almost entirely high-rise luxury residential. It created those towers without the support system that was needed, without the infrastructure that was needed, and without an understanding of what would happen. Now, of course, we have the problems of climate change and severe flood risks and also heat risks. So if in 15 years we look at what's here and it is merely more residential towers, or essentially residential towers, still with inadequate open space, inadequate infrastructure, CSOs flooding basements, a lack of school seats, a lack of cohesion across communities within Long Island City. Right now, we have Queensbridge to the north, which is incredibly underserved, and we have a very affluent community to the south. If we don't deal with that and create opportunity where it's really needed, and just pose this current situation as an either-or, resiliency or housing, then that's a false choice and we're going to regret it. So I think we need to look at, the community holistically and more creatively and beyond the toolkit of zoning, which it's tough if that's our only tool. And in spite of all the pressure that city planners and our representatives, who are very smart and very dedicated and hardworking, in spite of what they're trying to do, they need to be given a better toolkit, and we need to do this differently this time.
Here's some water for you. Great answer. Hey everyone, thanks for having us. Thanks Tom for inviting me to be on the panel. Thanks for coming out on a freezing, well, not too bad, but pretty cold night. So I think first I should preface anything I say as chair of Queens Community Board 2 is we don't have a position yet. Our position is we don't have a position. We're gonna go through the process with my fellow Community Board 2 members, and we will have a position on this specific plan. But if we're looking ahead to 15 years from now, I think for me, the key word is abundance, right? Abundance for everyone who wants to be here, for families, for for seniors, for supportive housing, low-income housing, for our very vulnerable, and for the affluent who have made a home here. If I look back 15 years from now, I want us all to be able to be here. I want makers to be able to make. I want the Talking Heads crew to be able to keep influencing music in this district. Keep the great arts culture we have going, and ultimately, doing what we need to do to maintain a beautiful and resilient waterway and a community.
All right. Sure, I agree, right? I guess I'll add to that. I want to see the unique cultural and socioeconomic world of Queens, which is like no other community in the world, be the same or better, even more diverse than it is now. I don't want to lose that. I want NYCHA to get an influx of money, and that the people's apartments in NYCHA look like the ones with all these glass towers behind us. That's what we should be spending our money on. I want to see Black and brown families not get displaced like they have been in the last few years. I want them to stay here. I don't care if you're making 10 grand a year, like you should be able to live in Queens. So number one is that. I guess I want to see a city that that prioritizes their budget towards truly affordable living spaces and working spaces for artists and all of that stuff, parks and schools and all the things that we care about, but a true dedicated budget that reflects that rather than just lip service from our mayor. And I want to see, I guess I could go on with like idealistic things, but I guess I want to see a citizenry and a community like ours that hasn't stopped fighting and speaks up and pushes for the things that they know we need to have, because that's the only way anything gets done. So I love Queens. I want to see it be Queens in 15 years.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me, and it's really great to see so many people really engaged in such an important process and project. So I'll go quick, because what I was going to say is also very similar. I think, looking at the future, a neighborhood that actually really can accommodate a really, really wide range of people, income levels, ages, family sizes and structures, and just really is a place that is accessible and affordable, and a place that a really wide range of people can live and thrive, and as part of a complete community, park, schools, just sort of everything you really need to make that really sustainable and abundant for future seasons and Northford. So thank you.
Great. It's hard to look at the current plan without looking at the 2001 rezoning in terms of what we've learned. So I wanted to ask the group about the fact that the 2001 rezoning came at a different time, pretty much the same place, although it was, if you think about it, it's before mandatory inclusionary housing. It was before Superstorm Sandy, and the reality of climate change impacts. It was before the idea of infrastructural needs really came into focus, and the current housing crisis. What important lessons can be gleaned from that plan that can help inform OneLIC?
Probably many lessons. The first is that mixed use really means residential development, because it allows for anything, and residential development is the most lucrative, and developers should be building what is going to increase their profits the most. I mean, that's understandable. But if we want true mixed use, it needs to be structured in. It's not going to happen just with a mixed use rezoning designation. The second is that rezoning is not planning. We need to understand ahead of time what the impact of a rezoning will be. The 2001 rezoning estimated, I think, 300 residential units, and maybe there were resulted in maybe 10,000 in short number of years, it was completely off track. There were no, it resulted in all these problems, pressures on old industrial infrastructure. And then now, following Superstorm Sandy, when the parts of the neighborhood were under more than 6 feet of water, and just imagine for a minute what 6 feet of water actually looks like. That's what the situation was at Animal Basin. And that's where we're talking about building towers. It just, we need to take that into account. In terms of affordability, what we've seen is that the abundant or the tremendous development did not bring prices down. It made prices soar. Long Island City is not, it's not economics 101. It's a particular neighborhood. It's a highly desirable neighborhood, and we're not gonna build our way to affordability as much as I would like to. And I think, speaking for myself, housing is a right, not just a luxury, obviously. But we're not going to build our way to it. We need to structure it in. And those are just a few of the lessons that come to mind to me.
Plus one. But in addition to everything you mentioned, I think what I can add is the need for coordination, right? It was from what I understand, I was 16 at the time, but it was a slapdash, slapdash development, kind of like a free-for-all compared to what we're looking at now and what we have seen since. I think the coordination between various city agencies, coordination between the community, and just a foresight, I think was, you go in with the best of intentions, you go in with knowing what you know, and you don't know what you don't know, but that's something, we know a lot more now, 24 years later, so lots of lessons to be learned. I'm sure we'll talk about, what's different about this.
I think the number one thing, and I've read your report many times, it's a great report, and the number one lesson is that, there was an EIS done, and then it was completely ignored. And the community had zero leverage to stop that, right? They were promised, they were given these projections, and then completely ignored. So I think the number one lesson is having some kind of authoritative check on the development that is tied to these EISs when the plan comes out, so that you have some kind of leverage as a community to say you went past the limit that was promised. So what is it? What now? Like, there's got to be something in writing. If you don't get it in writing, then it's just going to be more promises that are going to get broken the second we've passed everything. And so that to me is like the number one lesson. And you mentioned MIH, which wasn't in the previous one, and so we have that now. And the median income of a Black family in Long Island City is $36,000. The median income of a Latino family is $56,000. The more affordable MIH of 60% AMI, if you look at how much a 2-bedroom apartment is, those families cannot afford those prices. So even with MIH, that still leaves out all the people that I fight for every day. And so I would like to see us go beyond MIH, because MIH doesn't even get to where we need to go. And again, have some kind of community leverage to make sure that the city does what it promises, and if it doesn't, that there's some kind of punishment.
Yeah, and I did want to second a couple tools that I think weren't around back then. One, MIH, Mandatory Inclusionary Housing, is a very, as flawed as it is a very, very important tool to make sure you're guaranteed to get some affordable housing. And I think that there's a huge number of units, there's a lot of room to negotiate even further on that. But then also there are public sites, and public sites is something when the city really controls it and has a lot more leverage and tends to put more direct resources into making that deeply affordable. It's a really, really important tool that also, you don't get those always when you're talking about rezonings and crafting the whole picture.
So I want you to keep the microphone, because I have a housing question, and an open New York has a very supply side approach to housing. We've done a lot of research. what can you tell us about some of the research that you've done about the idea that you're building more housing, adding more housing to the stock has actually resulted in lower housing costs? And what are some of the ways that, in addition to MIH, that we can guarantee or better ensure that we're going to get affordable housing and not have a repeat of 2001?
Yeah, so sort of writ large at Open Europe, we're really focused on why housing costs are just insane, right? And why they're skyrocketing, both rents and costs for home ownership. And you know, a lot of the research really does show that you know, we're fighting over scarcity. New York City and the whole region, especially when you look at the whole transit network and think about the whole housing market in the regional sense. We build very, very little actually. We build less per capita than San Francisco. And there's been really interesting research. I spent a lot of time talking to folks across the country, and for example, Austin, Texas built a ton of housing really quickly and rents have dropped for a year straight, right? So this is not to say that one building immediately feel the rent drop. It's more like kind of collectively recognizing that across the whole region, across the whole city, like we will not get out of this without building more housing as a really important part of the solution, and it needs to be a really wide range of types of housing. And we just pay a lot of attention to research to really understand what this might look like. And I will say this is not, you know, one-off projects or one-off rezonings don't solve that. We actually work a lot on state legislation and a lot of things of how you fix some of the structural sort of fair housing challenges in this. So I think that it's really important to sort of be keeping in mind how much we're fighting over scarcity in the city, and that's a choice. And then also that when you're thinking about one neighborhood and one neighborhood plan, that you have to get the plan right in a way that really works for the neighborhood, and that we're all struggling with a much bigger problem that needs much bigger solutions beyond what one thing is going to solve. But again, I do think that having MIH, having a lot of units to you know, negotiate the whole project around, and having public sites is a really, really, really important tool. And all the research really shows that what you need is a really diverse range of housing options for a lot of different types of people. And how do you achieve that is kind of our collective challenge in the city.
So can I just jump in? Because
Sure.
I just have to question one thing. We lost 600,000 people since 2020. So the population of New York City has gone down by 600,000 people. And our housing stock has actually beefed up. We made 33,000 units last year and 28,000 average in the last several years. So we actually have more housing now per person than we've had in decades. And in fact, we have, I've heard that part of the story to answer that is that there's you know, less people per apartment living now, and like there, you know, there used to be more people per apartment, but in fact, we have more people living per unit now than we did in 1980. It's actually gotten more, not a lot more, but more. So I've yet to hear a question. I'm curious if you have an answer. We have literally over 500,000 less people in the city, and we've created that much more housing in that same amount of time. So we're at 2013 population levels. How can we have scarcity? I don't believe we have scarcity. I think we have scarcity of affordable housing stock, but I've not seen any scarcity overall. We actually have tons of apartments and the price has not gone down. So I've been waiting for that to happen.
Yeah, I think that, so there's a lot of really solid research that that especially HPD has done in really tracking this, that it is just a fact we are building significantly less housing than even earlier decades. Like the 1920s, we built many, many times more housing units, and other cities just, when they build enough housing, rents don't rise, right? And so there's a huge amount of data out there and a lot of research that is trying to really understand, like, what does it mean when one building goes up, what happens across the street? You know, that's not meaningful enough to convince people of that. And this is why I think this is such a huge challenge. And frankly, I think a lot of the reason that our housing crisis isn't worse is New Jersey builds a huge amount of housing, and we're actually seeing a lot of influx of people moving out of the state, but moving to places that have actually built a lot more. But I really don't want to, this is such a huge problem that has been decades in the making, and also it's really complicated and it's really hard to figure out, and one project's not going to fix it. But I do think that, you know, even compared to New York City's history, but especially compared to other cities, we just really are fighting over scarcity. I think people are really feeling that.
No.
also want to mention that, you did mention at the beginning that another recent change is the passage of the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity text amendment, which doesn't necessarily guarantee affordable housing, but it provides options for that. It loosens zoning regulations to allow more different housing types, but also there's an incentive for universal affordability preference. Do you see that? I mean, it allows property owners to add 20% floor area as long as that's 100% affordable. Amber, do you see that as something that will be in play in Long Island City as an increased density? That as a legitimate incentive for more affordable housing other than MIH?
Yeah, I think City of Yes was a really smart set of proposals because it actually sort of did take this approach. Okay, every neighborhood's a little bit different. We need a really wide range of housing types, right? It like actually legalized little kind of granny flats or backyard cottages, which have been really, really popular with seniors for aging in place. It used this universal affordability preference to just get more housing basically as of right built into the zoning code without even having to go through MIH, which I think is really, really smart. And just really trying to, again, sort of, we need so many different types of solutions. None of this is one size fits all. But I think that we have to be really creative and smart about all of the various tools that are there. It's a really hard problem to solve, and it's been like decades in the making, so we need a really wide range of solutions.
Great. I wanted to move on to some other topics. Lisa, you mentioned infrastructure. And in 2001, in our 2018 report, MAS talked about the unintended consequences of when you get residential as opposed to commercial office space and those impacts on infrastructure, on schools, on open space. So what do you think needs to happen in terms of infrastructural improvements?
I mean, the first thing that needs to happen is that we have to acknowledge that before we build, bring 15,000 more units to the neighborhood, we should deal with the current problems of infrastructure and CSO runoffs and, lack of resiliency. So what we're proposing is a holistic approach to development that looks at the need for school seats, the need for upgrading infrastructure, the need to channel stormwater runoff and CSO runoff to one part of Vernon Boulevard so that infrastructure can be upgraded there and it can be controlled. The problem is that if we just rezone first and then deal with these problems, compounded problems later, or say we're going to do it, it's not going to happen. I mean, that's really what the answer is frequently by planners because they're limited in what they can do. So I don't blame city planners, but I would say that rezoning here and doing OneLIC is, in my view, in our view, repeating a lot of the problems of the past just because it is not looking thoroughly at what's needed or making the plans that are needed to accommodate people who are already here, and certainly not the people who would be coming. So,
any other thoughts on infrastructure?
I mean, the environmental thing is a huge one. I guess I want to add, I'm stealing this talking point from you guys, Long Island City Coalition, but like, we can build, in this study area where this is rezoning is, sure, we can probably build buildings that resist flooding, right? And that's great. But as I've heard many times from very smart people, the water is just going to go around, right? So even if we protect our fancy, shiny new buildings that we build that have some MIH built into them, that water is going to go to Queensbridge, it's going to go up, it's going to go down, and it's going to impact that. We can't build it's not about just building housing. I do support the plan of taking the land that we have and turning it into a waterfront park that absorbs flooding, because that's like forward thinking for the future. And I have not yet heard a very good like retort to that idea. I'm open to other ideas. I am not an environmental engineer, right? So like I get that I am not the authority on this, but I and the community, this community that I've spoken to, all the people that I talk to all the time here in Queens, have the same questions. They're just like, well, what is the city ideas? And I realize we haven't gotten there. We're going to find out soon. So I'm sort of preemptively saying that maybe the city does have a really great plan for that. But it can't just be about housing. It has to be about the infrastructure has to be about the environmental issues as well, especially the flooding.
Yeah, I do want to second, I focus a lot on housing day to day, but in general, again, back to like complete communities, all of that stuff is extremely important, that you're making a neighborhood that's actually gonna work.
And I'm just gonna add from the CB2 perspective, Sunnyside and Woodside and slice of Nasmith need LSE to figure it out before the resilience issues start,
But I would say Woodside's at a higher elevation, so we're not at the same.
But those,
We have our other infrastructure issues.
I just want to say that resiliency is also beautiful. The park at Hunters Point South has proven itself in storms. It is one of the reasons we're here today. Long Island City is popular and a destination for people from across the city, and that's largely or substantially because of its waterfront parks. They're beautiful, they are an economic driver, they have created new businesses and new opportunities while protecting the neighborhood from serious flooding. And we can do the same thing at Hunters Point North. At the same time, establishing a connection, a tissue between Hunters Point South and Hunters Point North. And again, I can't say enough that parks are economic drivers. So while we're creating the open space that's needed, and Long Island City is third lowest in per capita open space, which people often don't realize, because we have these beautiful, parks along the river, but because of the development that's gone on here for the last 25 years, there is just not enough open space. And so again, we have this opportunity to do the right thing, and at the same, with regard to resiliency and open space, and at the same time, connect two disparate communities, create economic drivers, create kind of a base for the community. The parks also kind of create space around which communities are built. So it's not just about a park, it's about resiliency, it's about economic opportunity, about connecting people, about establishing a service hub by the water, and putting buildings where they're safe. There was an article a few years ago by a famous architect, Vishwan Chakrabarty, I'll pronounce his name wrong, but pointing out how the city could bring 500,000 new units here without destroying the character of neighborhoods and without building in floodplains. And rezoning, upzoning, remember too that upzoning it's a gift. If a developer and an owner is allowed to add, instead of 3 stories to a building, 20 stories or 40 or 50 or 70, and in this plan we're talking about 50 to 70 story buildings, that's millions and hundreds of millions of dollars of value. And in our view and in our plan, we recommend a value capture plan that would help support resiliency measures, help support what's needed to take care of all the new residents who are coming. So I think there are other ways beyond, and MIH just is not enough. I mean, it's a start, but really it helps people who are, maybe upper middle class. I mean, a lot of people here who need apartments do not benefit from MIH. So we need a better value capture plan.
I want to talk about connections, other connections, and these are things that make Long Island City unique. I wanted to talk about the importance of the IBZ areas and the opportunities for preserving the active manufacturing, the film industry, art space, food production, catering, warehousing. I actually use a recording studio in the IBZ, and it's incredible when you're there and you see how active it is. When we had our prep call last week, you talked about opportunities for other connections with the IBZ, in the expansion, preserving, and connections to support these important industries and possible threats. So I wanted to see what the group thought about the importance of the IBZ, preserving the IBZ. Anybody want to take it? They're passing the buck.
I'll start, okay. So we talk a lot about the IBZ because we think we should be able to grow the IBZ, bring new, innovative, clean manufacturing companies and jobs to this area. We can connect this IBZ to others along the coast, and we've recommended a blue highway that would help transport goods without using trucks and creating more pollution. That's another economic driver. If we're only talking about high-rise residences, that brings construction and service jobs. We can create a more diversified economy and greater opportunity by, respecting the IBZ here and connecting it to others. And I think, we have that opportunity right in front of us.
I mean, I'll jump in just because you're asking about, it's not about the IBZ, but about the same topic, right? Which is the economic boost and you said culture and all the different things. So obviously I'm going to plug the Land Trust project of taking the DOE building and turning it into a huge community hub for artists and food makers and manufacturers and co-ops and a rooftop farm and all these types of things. Because to your point, like, we need to just think about more than just housing. B, the racial angle that you implied, there is an invisible barrier at the Queensboro Bridge, and the people who live right north of it do not come to the south, and vice versa. And that's crazy in this day and age that we're okay with that. And so the one huge important value of that Land Trust project is that we formed it talking to the community for years. We were on Zoom calls and talking to not just groups, individuals, what do you need here? We didn't say, hey, here's our plan, do you like it? We said, here's a blank canvas, what do you want to paint it with? And so that represents a true community effort, and it represents a kind of art and business and culture that people in this community want to see there. And so it would be a way to break down that racial barrier and have a food, there's a food desert in Queensbridge. I don't know if you've been there, there's nothing but like atomic wings and like Popeyes. There's no healthy food options. So that would be a place with healthy food options that people could come down and hopefully, this is a very pie in the sky sort of idealism, but it's just the beginning of what could finally break through that barrier and have people not feel like they're not wanted here, because they're not wanted here. I've spoken to many people and they come down and they get looks and they get comments and they're like, why would we go down to the southern part of Long Island City? And that's crazy. So I think projects like that, I'm not just saying ours, but I think the IBZ can do the same thing, right? You can have things that have awesome things happening that are industrial and bridge that gap that we really need to get bridged.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned the Queensbridge houses, because that was the other, stole my thunder. I was going to talk about the connections or lack thereof. And there's physical barriers, right, with bridge, and then you have, the Queensbridge houses are not part of the rezoning area, but they will be impacted, right? And I'm just interested in other thoughts on how to socially and economically integrate. And we've seen this in other rezonings around the city. We saw this in Gowanus, where there were 3 NYCHA properties on the outside border of the rezoning. But, how do you make those social and economic connections with the Queensbridge houses, with this rezoning? And it's perhaps not a zoning issue. It's hard. Zoning is the framework, and it's what's the stuff inside that framework that is really what makes makes it a successful plan. So, anybody have any thoughts on, is this something that the community board will be wrestling with?
Connections for sure. You know, the various incomes and everyone that we serve will absolutely be a big concern and, you know, consideration as we go through this process. I want to touch on just the fact, you know, the fact that the IBC is actually part of this consideration. You know, that's different, and you know, and when I say that's different from the past, so, you know, just is it enough? Does it go far enough? That's a different conversation, but factually, it is, you know, it's baked in, it's considered. And if I may add, Tom, answer your other question about, you know, the social and economic integration with a personal story of what good looks like. So in 1999, my mom and I were in a homeless shelter in the Upper West Side, 103rd and Broadway. And so I missed the 2001 rezoning. I was in that shelter over there. That shelter was run by the Volunteers of America. They're still around. The shelter is still around. A few months ago, stopped by there on my way to my fancy French dinner, and they said, "Thank you. I can't believe I came from here and I'm going to spend $100 over there per person." So I went to the Delta program at Booker T. Washington High School, where all the white kids in the school were. Timothy Chalamet graduated from the same program 10 years after me, so I wanted to go to the Timothy Chalamet lookalike competition. And you know, because I was in Manhattan, I was close to everything. I was close to the museums. I was close to. I should also say, you know, the Hollywood bigwigs who I sat next to, and then I went back to live with, you know, all the black and brown kids were, you know, really in that shelter and on Columbus and you know, further away from Broadway, as you have it. But you know, just being there, being in that situation, I learned how to code switch. I learned how to navigate various economic and racial and you know, ethnic spaces. I learned Spanish there, and just, you know, being in this dense, connected neighborhood with exposure to all these various. You know, the upper economic range, the lower economic range, changed the course of my life. So I would love to be, you know, I would love to make sure, like you said, you know, preserve that and make that happen for, you know, definitely our, you know, our neighbors in Queensbridge. They're outside of the CV2 jurisdiction, but for everyone who needs that. So really, if we're answering what does good look like, I would like good to look like the opportunities I've had in life.
Can I just add one thing, because you're asking about how do we do good, right? So there's a paper that just came out by Kim and Lee. They were academics from California, and they studied all the upzone neighborhoods that happened in the last 20 years here in New York City. So they looked at that neighborhood in 2000 and what it looks like today. And conclusively, every single neighborhood, no matter where it was in New York City, the racial makeup changed. You can probably guess the answers. It's like non-Latino whites shot up, blacks, Latinos went down. The cost of apartments shot up like 20%. Like all the things that we kind of, you know, I guess I'll say progressives sort of assume about gentrification is hard-coded in this really detailed report. And it's like a long, I mean, you can read the whole thing, it's many, many pages. But so if you're talking, and it's all upzone, they looked specifically at upzonings. Not once in any of those upzones did the opposite happen. Not once was there like, oh, what do you know? like prices went down and it got more diverse. Like that did not happen. So if we're talking about a rezoning, no, and they were very conclusive. You read the final conclusion of it, they were very clear that if you upzone, you can expect this to happen. And so if we do care about the opportunities of Black and brown people and poor people and et cetera, insert, whatever word here, upzoning is not gonna get you that. So if we're gonna rezone this area, then what are we gonna do to counter the effects of that upzoning to make sure that that doesn't happen? That's my question.
I do think that something that frankly is really, really dear to my heart and been the focus of my work is there's a real question of where we're upzoning and why. And when you look at the history of New York City, and it's just been very true until very, very recently, we kind of, the wealthiest and frankly whitest parts of the city tend to be off limits to new homes, right? They're actually on net losing homes. That's what all the data is showing. So I think it's really, really important to think about that in the context of the places that are not doing their fair share from like a kind of basic fair housing perspective, and then actually thinking about it from that perspective can help correct for some of those. And I also do think that talking about NYCHA, talking about the project that you've been working on that sounds really amazing, and talking about publicly owned land is a really, really, really critical piece. A big reason that Gowanus actually felt like a different rezoning. One, it was a wealthier neighborhood. Two, they had a massive public site that was deeply, deeply affordable housing. So I think as you all kind of go through this process and really think about like getting the most leverage possible for public assets, and also thinking about, NYCHA is publicly owned land. What does that look like to invest in those sites the way they deserve and have been sort of starved for so long? I think it's a really, it's just an essential tool, and outcomes look really, really different depending on what you're doing with the publicly owned, assets.
I think that's a really good point about NYCHA improvements. I want to leave some time for questions, but you brought up publicly owned land, which is going back. I remember going to workshops for the original LIC core. I prepared copious comments for the Annabelle Basin rezoning that didn't go through. I attended a number of workshops for the Your LIC private zoning. And so here we are now, and the DOE building was in play in all of these private rezoning. So I guess this would be a good last question, because I think everyone has different perspectives. But as you know, EDC plans on releasing a REI request for expressions of interest. I was trying to avoid saying that instead of the acronym, but it came out anyway. So there's no specific plan, and it's supposed to come out at some point in 2025, maybe the spring. It presents an opportunity for a site, DOE building, which is a tremendous opportunity. So I'm interested in your thoughts on and how important is the DOE building in this rezoning?
I'll say a couple words about that. I think it's a huge opportunity. Again, the DOE sits almost midway between Queensbridge houses and Hunters Point South. It would be an enormously kind of beneficial driver, I think, of economic integration and people integration, and bringing kids from Queensbridge, meeting kids from Hunters Point South, in podcast studios, art studios, that rooftop garden, light manufacturing spaces, all sorts of spaces. I mean, the building is about 600,000 square feet. There's just so much that could be done there that as a hub of services and, kind of opportunities that kids at Queensbridge, especially right now, just don't have. And it's directly across from Cornell Tech, and we're proposing restored habitat by the water right there. I mean, there could be research opportunities and job mentoring and all kinds of mentoring. So I think it's enormously important. And just one thing I want to say about public properties, and you're right, absolutely, that public properties do offer an opportunity for more deeply affordable housing, but that doesn't change And we're talking here about Animal Basin, which has public properties that are in play and that the community has been requesting be used for open space and resiliency for many years, plus as a service hub. High-rise buildings in any residential buildings, and this is in the New York State Department of State Code, which says residences should not be in a floodplain, period. We're not just talking about, a general floodplain. We're talking about a low point. We're talking about land that has a very high water table. And so, in theory, other public sites, and there are great sites around the city, all around the city to build housing, but not here. And that's...
So obviously I'm biased because we have a proposal that we want to see happen in the DOE building, so obviously, whatever. It's out there. But more important than what, our little group dreams of, or even the community that we worked with to make this proposal dreams of, is the philosophy that public land, which we all own, right, should be used for public good, which means you can't give it away to a private developer, even if they promise a few, public apartments. Like, you are now giving away, especially in this day and age, there may be some cities that you could make that argument for, right? But like New York, we have precious few parcels of public land left. Almost none, in Queens especially. Like, what is there left? And so there is a bill in City Council right now that is the Public Land for Public Good Act that would force, somebody doesn't want me to talk. that would force, that would prevent us from selling. You would have to, if the city wants to do something with land, they have to go to a mission-driven nonprofit first, or they have to do something publicly. It has to be used for the public good. Now, that has not passed yet. I would encourage our city council to pass it, because then you can pass the buck and say, look, I can't do anything about it, Mr. Developer. Like, the law doesn't let me give it to you, and it's hard-coded in that it's for the public. But until that passes, we have to keep fighting for that, because that is public land. And once you've given it up, it's gone for good. So please, even if it's not the QPS building that the Western Queens Community Land Trust wants to see happen, it has to be something for the public. And that's it.
Amen. So Mark Levine, Manhattan Borough President, a few years ago, put out a plan. He identified 22 sites for affordable housing and throughout Manhattan. And just the sheer number of what was possible is because Manhattan just has more public sites. In Queens, we have precious few. And Queens also overall gets $2.42 per capita from the city and in city benefits. Staten Island gets $10 a person, and they don't even have 500,000 people. And of course, we always joke Queens get the money, but Manhattan get the money, and Staten Island gets $10 per capita. But that doesn't mean to me that we don't walk and chew gum, right? It's still on a borough by borough process. So yes, we could let people go to New Jersey, right? We could. The Hoboken's actually has some pretty nice places, pretty affordable too comparatively. But does that mean we just let people leave? We lost 6% of New York City population, right? So I think the main thing we need to keep in mind about public sites is the leverage. Nowhere else do we have that leverage. I personally feel like we should always play hardball with our public sites, right? I don't know what that looks like, but I should also say that not only deeply affordable units, but also supportive housing, housing for families. Like, at the moment, with what we have, with being able to walk, needing to walk and chew gum, because it's not stopping, right? Like, we can say no, but the status quo isn't working for anybody other than the uber rich, right? Right now, folks in this community in LIC, really the main choice we have is who do we get priced out by. So not doing nothing to me is not an option, right? And if it's using every tool we have in our toolbox, and if part of that is public sites, then let's play hardball, but let's do something.
Anne Marie, any last words on public property?
No, I feel like I kind of already said a lot of this too. It's really, really important for leverage. It's really exciting. There have been so many creative ideas and so much activity around them, and it's just, yeah, it's really, really important.
Yeah, in the rezonings that we have covered, we always look at, so what are city-owned assets that could be used for affordable housing or repurposed in a way that serves the community? And I thought that there's the DOE building was a great example of opportunities that a lot of neighborhoods don't have. So remains to be seen. We're going to go to a couple of questions from the audience. We lost a microphone. That was going to be the one I'd carry out into the floor. But how are we going to do this? Actually, why don't I give you this microphone? You guys are going to have to take this one. Just go over up. Okay. So this one is going to go to the audience. So who wants to go first? The man in the front row.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for this discussion. Okay, if Long Island City is the fastest growing community, I believe in the country, but I'll just say, regionally, and we have a City of Yes proposal that's designed to basically spread development throughout the city, why Long Island City? Why is this development so important here in Long Island City?
Thank you.
I got the hand out.
It's a really good question, and I think City of Yes was really, really great. City of Yes on its own, it's not gonna lower rents and lower housing costs the way that we need. There have been some estimates that we basically need 10 times City of Yes, and so I think this also really comes to why it's so important that we need this to be citywide and statewide. Again, we work on state stuff, and I actually think a lot of this is state level legislation. A lot of the pressures you're feeling in New York City is probably because Westchester and Long Island build basically nothing, and they have some of the most exclusionary zoning patterns in the country. So anyway, longer conversation, but I think that some of this is especially, so many places everywhere needs to be part of the solution, and I focus mostly on the places that have really well located transit and have built nothing. It is true Long Island City has built a lot. I think that kind of comes down to some of the conversations here. There's a lot of opportunity, right? And I think it's really awesome, this whole conversation process of like, how do you use that opportunity for the better? But this is a regional and statewide problem, and there's a lot of solutions needed.
So one thing I may not be clear from the things I've said is, we've worked a lot in the last couple of years with elected officials and city agencies of many different agencies and so on. And it's been a genuine privilege to work with them in the sense that, well, in all senses, but specifically that there's very smart people who really care about the city working in all these agencies. And so on one level, we all agree of what we want on like an aspirational level, and I appreciate it, and I think that's something to acknowledge, right? It's not like it's the community versus the city, we're working together. But we live in a neoliberal, austerity-driven system that it doesn't matter what we want as individuals, because the system is gonna churn and it's gonna move the way it moves. And so the fact that we all really want the same thing, it just doesn't matter, because this machine is gonna plow over. And so City of Yes is a good example. Without funding, like subsidies, like legitimate subsidies from our federal government, our state government, and our city budgets to push housing, City of Yes is a disaster, because all it does is open the door for development. Now, if you have City of Yes combined with a huge influx of money, sure, it's a whole different game, but because we're left all fighting for scraps because there is no money being given towards housing, and there hasn't been since the Depression when FDR came in and did all that amazing stuff that lasted for decades. So we end up arguing with ourselves, well, what's the best way and what's the technique? And the reality is we need money that subsidizes, and that, you know, obviously our president is not gonna do that, and so we're all left trying to figure out how do we raise money. And so back to what you had asked, and I think you had mentioned, the value capture thing. If we're gonna rezone, right, and we're gonna implement all these new City of Yes, you know, levers and so on, we need to make sure that that zoning pulls back a chunk of those profits that are given to the private developers by the new zoning laws back into the city. So if all of a sudden your land is worth 10 times as much, we need 50%, 70% of that profit to go back into the city to pay for all these things. Then City of Yes might actually work, because then you've got all this extra money and you can take advantage of all these things, and it feeds back. But without that money, we're just lying to ourselves if we think it's gonna do anything.
I should also add that, you know, to me, yeah, like you said, like City of Yes is a drop in the bucket from a housing perspective, right? CB2, you know, we're one of two community boards in all of Queens that voted yes for City of Yes, you know, there was one other community board that didn't flat out reject it, but I think for us the easier parts, quote unquote, were the economic opportunity and the environmental stuff. But from a housing perspective, it's nothing. It's, you know, 80,000 units over 15 years or 20 years. Like it's yeah, it's a drop in the bucket, right? So and in, you know, 2025, why Long Island City? Because 2001 has happened. It's, you know, we are where we are now, and you know. Yeah, just gotta deal with it, right? That's my feeling.
But let's remember that we're talking about almost doubling the size of
It's
this
wrong.
neighborhood.
It's just wrong.
I mean, we're talking about what, maybe 17,000 units, 35,000 residents. That's a lot. So we need to be pretty thoughtful about that.
All right, we're gonna go to another question.
Hi, thanks everyone for being here. My name is Laura Singh. I'm actually the land use director for Council Member 1, the city council member overseeing District 26, which includes Long Island City. So thanks to all of you for being up there. We always appreciate your engagement. These conversations are super important. Yes, absolutely, this is not just about housing. It's about everything else that has to come along with housing to make a place livable. Open space, resiliency, infrastructure, school seats. We are in the process of combing through tons and tons and tons of data that we've collected through community engagement activities, surveys, door knocking, tabling. It's an exciting time. I want to quickly talk about MIH. That came up several times during this panel, and I want to demystify it a little bit. I often hear during these conversations that MIH housing is quote unquote not affordable, and I just want to clarify, we don't have MIH housing in Long Island City because MIH was passed about 10 years ago, and the last time Long Island City had a big rezoning was a very long time before that. So we don't know what it looks like for Long Island City to have MIH housing. And the 4 AMI brackets that MIH housing serves are 40% AMI, 60% AMI, 80% AMI, and 115% AMI. 3 out of 4 of those AMI bands are considered low income. And yes, 115% AMI is moderate income. Given that, we know that when City of Yes passed, there was a change with the MIH options. And option 3, which is the lowest income option, 40% AMI, can now be a standalone option. So I'm wondering if Anne Marie could speak to how that could be put to use as a tool in this rezoning to make sure more very low income households get served.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that clarification. And honestly, City of Yes literally just passed like a month or so ago, so I think we're really learning how it's going to start to impact like other neighborhood planning efforts, and it's a really, really good point. And something also to remember, this is a point of leverage for the community to think about those options, really understand how all of this interacts with City of Yes, which again is brand new. We haven't done anything. We haven't tested out exactly how that interacts, but I think it's something that's really, really important to keep in mind of what makes sense most for this community and how do you really have the most leverage possible when this is going through the whole planning process. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks, Laura. Here we are.
Step right up.
Thank you. I'm Lisa Deller from Community Board 2. I was on Community Board in 2001, and literally the Department of City Planning sat at the conference room table and said there are going to be 630 units of housing here, and it's all going to be, commercial. But that's not my question. My question is this. What I see here is I see we have the neighborhood plan and we have the rezoning. And the ne'er do meet, right? They don't dovetail with each other well. We have all, big ideas about open space and maker space and affordable housing and lots of things we want to see as a livable city, as humans in this community. And yet we're going to have this rezoning. And the rezoning it just is, it says you're going to be an R10 and you can build 700-foot buildings in this zone. So the idea that Lisa was talking about, the question is to expand on that, this idea of value capture, because what is on the private sites, there's going to be a lot of value generated. And the only way we're going to be able to pay for public improvements that we want, not just infrastructure like sewers, but maker space and artist space and open space, is through that kind of transfer. And it's something that they have, you see it in Battery Park City, they did it. So I wondered, Lisa, if you would elaborate on that.
Sure.
Thank you.
So, right, we've talked about trying to look at upzoning as a huge opportunity for developers and as an opportunity for, it could be, in theory, there could be opportunities for the neighborhood as well if we manage it in a way that the community is getting back a healthy portion of the added value that those additional stories create. And also, we don't insist on every site being 70 stories. But in order to sustain the neighborhood as it is and to grow the neighborhood, we need to capture value from somewhere. Again, if a building is going from 5 stories of industrial space to 12 stories of mixed industrial and live-work space, or maybe there's a possibility of, on a clean manufacturing site, of actually mixing residential with light industrial. That additional square footage, the value of that square footage, part of it needs to come back to the community. Also, there is a waterfront access plan that stipulates that private sites on the waterfront are required to provide, I think it's, don't quote me, roughly 20% of the maybe square footage of the plot for waterfront access and along the waterfront. Well, never mind, for waterfront access. We need to adhere to that. We need to not water down that plan. In our proposal, in the vision plan, we're talking about using the public properties plus that 20% that's required in the waterfront access plan to create the park along the waterfront. I don't know, Lisa, I didn't answer this very well, but.
All right. Well, I can tell you that if we study Vancouver, for example, right? So Vancouver in 1961 to today, their population doubled. They tripled their housing stock. So the supply and demand argument would say prices went down. In reality, prices are, it's one of the most expensive cities in the world and definitely North America. So what happened? Well, what happened was exactly what Lisa said, which is the minute they rezoned a piece of land, the value of that land went up. So that land now got sold at a higher price. So if you're gonna buy that land and you're gonna develop on it, you now have to charge really high prices for your apartments to justify the cost of the land that you just bought. So it's this vicious cycle, and it doesn't lower prices, it raises prices. So what Vancouver did is they have, if you rezone a building, they passed laws. If you rezone a building, 80% of that extra value has to be paid back into the city. Now, it's not always 80%, but it starts at 80%, and then I guess they negotiate, you know, I don't know all the details of every single rezoning, but I know the numbers start, the aspirational number is 80%, which is crazy, right? I mean, I'd be happy with 50% if we could get New York City to do that. But that's a huge thing. I would also say pied-à-terre taxes, right? I mean, how many like wealthy investors and BlackRocks are out there just buying up the property like Monopoly? So that money, right, tax them. That like, how, I should go back to one very philosophical thing. You go to the UN website on land and it says housing is a right, not a commodity. But we treat housing as a commodity. We pretend like we care about housing, but we treat it as a commodity. That is number one. And so until we start decommodifying the land and doing things like the value capture of taxing pied-à-terre and making sure that you can't buy houses because you just want to put them in your stock portfolio, we're screwed. So we definitely have to do things like that. We got to, all of those, that kind of taxing, the value capture, all of that, all of the above. I urge DCP and this city to get creative when you're coming out with your final recommendations for this land. Be creative, don't just stop with the usual like rules. There's a lot we can do, and we will support you. If you come up with something controversial and the mayor gives you shit, the community will get behind you and we will fight back. So we're here for you, but help us fight that.
Let me just say one other thing. Thanks, Donald. Just one other point. Most of the high rises at Hunters Point South have 20 and 30, actually more like 30-year tax abatements.
Yeah.
So while we're bringing all these new units to the neighborhood, we're starving the city of the taxes that are needed to support them. We just can't do that anymore.
Well, we could have a conference on value capture. It's a great idea, and it's something that should be explored. I got time for one more question, and then if you don't feel we've covered everything you want, you can talk to me at the bar. So your hand is raised right near me, so you get to ask the last question.
Thank you. You're gonna regret that. Oh yeah. Well, first I wanted to do a couple of data checks. One is the community board did at one point pass a resolution supporting that piece of land, where the water, that all we've been discussing, to be public open green space and not to be developed as housing. So the community board did take a stand on that in the past. I do want to make sure we keep that data that we do have the third lowest for public open green space. These are points to take away. We lost 600,000 people in the city. More housing does have to be built. We agree on that. We cannot, no matter how much you build, if we don't change the affordability calculation, there is a question at the end of this, we will not have affordability. Look around the world. I've looked around the world at all the studies, no matter how much housing in the end, it's not equaling affordability. The cost to build, which I agree with you, that is a problem. In Austin as well. I've read some articles recently about Austin, since you quoted them, they're getting more expensive because of the cost to build. So affordability is relative and is changing once the stuff is built. Upzoning equals segregation and less affordability. Data, not opinion. We are in a floodplain. Data, not an opinion. There is a waterfront plan. So a question I have, given all we've been talking about, this one little piece, if we dream, 20 years from now, I don't want to be underwater. That's my vision. So that the question is, leave that aside. Just say that as a park. Say that as a community land trust. What are your ideas for building truly affordable housing for the bottom 20% of earners on the private land that is being rezoned?
Anybody want to respond?
I'd love to hear from Albany House. Oh, sorry.
You don't have a microphone up there.
one thing I did want to, on the previous conversation, I'll answer your question. I would very much love to talk about this stuff. A lot of this is state policy, and one thing that hasn't been mentioned, we have a deeply, deeply inequitable property tax system that is the root of some of the issues that we talked about. It's a tricky Omni question that I'd love to talk about more. On your question before, I think that a lot of the research shows that you're not gonna get, I mean, we don't have a mechanism right now for middle class housing the way that we think of it in sort of like past, like in New York City's history. The way we did that was by building a huge amount of housing. That does not address the lowest percentage. I'm not gonna say that, that's
I'm
not.
asking you
the
how.
Yeah, public land.
No, I asked on the private. You're on the private, the public.
I think deeply affordable MIH options, public land, and then thinking about
So
all
you
of that
have nothing for
holistically.
private, is what you're saying. You have
Deeply-
not considered it.
I absolutely considered it. It's the entire ecosystem. MIH is designed as that tool. We didn't even used to have that, right? Which is why we have housing that's not all affordable. I think the lowest, it has to be subsidized. It absolutely has to be subsidized. So you can add city capital. You just have to make sure that happens soon. Projects get in line for city capital, they take a decade, and that's a really big problem. We have to speed up the process for the city. So you add city capital to projects, use the lowest, and to make them more affordable. It takes money.
Money for private land. Got it.
Yeah.
But they're developing, they have money.
I think it's probably a good time to end the discussion. I want to thank everybody again for coming. I want to thank my panelists. This is great. But a big shout out to Culture Lab for providing this awesome space. And I want to thank Edgo and Tess and Don, the whole staff, for being enormously helpful in getting this organized. And so, without further ado, I'm going to go to the bar and have a drink, and I recommend anyone else who wants to join me to do so. Thank you, everybody.